Hello and good afternoon from the recording studios in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's AP Art History with female artists. All right, let's get going. So this is Zofanitsa Anguissola. I think she's become more well known, even in just the last 5 to 10 years. She's from Italy. We consider her a Renaissance artist, even though her dates are generally Mannerism, even a little bit into Baroque, but I've never heard anybody really call her a Mannerist or Fontana for that matter. So we'll just keep her into the Renaissance world. Um, and the first two we're going to look at are actual portraits, group portraits of her family. And we can guess the reason for that is because she probably wasn't commissioned a lot in her early career. And so, like a lot of artists, she paints people that are around her. Um, and Also, hold on, I gotta close the door. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I tell my family to stop yelling in their card game. Okay, so yeah, so this is advertising her talents, and the next one really, I think, is even better at that, with the different head positions and also body positions. Um, her little brother looks to be quite odd in the middle there, but maybe that's just me. All right, and then last but not least, with Anguissola, we have a self-portrait. And remember, because female artists were so rare, partly because they weren't allowed to paint and sketch the male and female nude within the workshop system, so they were relegated to portraiture and still life, which is what we're going to see through, up until probably the 19th century, but with some exceptions, as we'll talk about. And then I forgot to say that Zofanitsa Anguissola's dad wanted his daughters to train in some sort of, I guess career is not the right word for back then, um, so he was a very progressive, forward-thinking individual in that way. He didn't want to just have his daughters get married. Um, and then the great thing about Zofanitsa Anguissola is that she reached great success. She was actually a court painter in the Spanish aristocratic courts. So there you go. Anything else I should mention about her? Okay, I think that's good. All right, now we're going to move on to Fontana. I think she's not as famous as Anguissola for sure, but more people are getting to know her. And this is a fairly straightforward portrait of a noblewoman. Again, you wouldn't know that it's necessarily a female artist or male artist. And then this one really is showing that curious sort of advertising of various different hand gestures and such. And again, emphasizing to somebody that she could do a really an outstanding job at painting your family. There you go. Now, these two are unusual in that they are history paintings. We don't see very many women doing history paintings. And on the left is a fairly famous narrative. I don't think it's as famous as some of the other Christian narratives. Certainly not as famous as maybe something on the right, although I think the one on the right is a little bit unusual. We'll talk about that in a second. But after Jesus had died on the cross, Mary Magdalene is in a garden, so the story goes. And there's a gardener there, and she touches his cloak and realizes it's Jesus, and then Jesus disappears. And then it's a compressed narrative because she's also in the background in her orange outfit, and she's to the tomb, and the angel says, "Oh, Jesus isn't here." And then on the right is kind of an unusual. I guess I would sort of call it a Holy Family with Elizabeth and St. John the Baptist. So, um, yeah, and then what's kind of weird about it is that Jesus looks like he's dying because he's not getting any oxygen to his body except maybe his face. And then there's old man Joseph in the background, emphasizing, of course, that he didn't have anything to do with the conception of Jesus because he's real old. so to speak. And then St. John the Baptist has his camel skin get up. He's got his reed cross. He's telling us to be quiet, that Jesus is sleeping. And then his mom, it was another miracle birth. It didn't involve God. I mean, God didn't come down and impregnate Elizabeth, but it was still a sort of a miracle because she was old. So there you go. All right, and then last but not least, this is another one of Fontana's, and this is another history painting based off of Greek mythology. This is Minerva at her toilet. Toilet in this context means that she's getting ready for the day, and it brings up an interesting question. Can we expect female artists to paint the female nude differently? And not for the male gaze. And in this case, I think we can say no. That looks pretty straightforward to me. And yeah, so there you go. And I'm trying to think of an example. Well, we'll see this with Artemisia in a couple minutes. So there you go. Never mind. All right, and then here on the left is the most famous painting by Artemisia Gentileschi. I would say that she is the most famous female artist up until the Impressionists, and maybe even beyond that these days. Everybody is interested in her. There's a brand new graphic novel about her life that I have. It's really dense. Maybe I'll get through it in the summer. And then on the right is the one that's in Detroit. There's not very many Artemisia Gentileschi paintings in the United States, so Detroit can feel good about that. And I think we've talked about, well, I know we've talked about the one on the left, but a little bit maybe on the right too. Remember, in the Baroque period, you have strong contrast between dark and light. Split second in time is usually seen, and it's usually melodramatic because it's trying to bring people back into the church or keep them in the church and away from that guy, Martin Luther, and others. And yeah, and it's a really popular subject, the heroine of the Bible, Judith. And then this one is really interesting. I don't think we looked at it in class. So this is Susanna and the Elders. This is another biblical story. Two old men came up to Susanna, and she was getting ready to bathe. It never says that she was nude in the Bible. Which brings up another, the question again about why necessarily Artemisia shows her as nude, and I guess appealing somewhat. I mean, it's a weird psychological thing going on here. Now, what does make this different is that the old men are in her personal space. She's distraught. Oftentimes with Susanna and the Elders, yes, the old men are there, and yes, Susanna is nude, but there's not that sort of overpowering, creepy feel to it. And so there we can say that yes, because Artemisia was a woman, she is going to paint it differently than a man. So the end of the story, or the story is these men say, have sex with us right now, or we're going to tell the whole village that you did have sex with us and it was your idea. And she says, I'll put my, everything into the hands of God. And one of the famous Davids of the Bible comes in and says, let's separate these guys so they have the same story. And if they don't have the same story, then they're lying and they should be killed. And that's what happens, actually. She survives. All right. And then this is kind of an interesting story. Forgive me if I've told it to you guys before, but this painting for many years, at least 4 or 5, was in the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. It's a self-portrait by Artemisia playing a lute. And it was owned by the millionaire, maybe billionaire, I think it's more like a millionaire, who started the Aveda salons and all the skin and hair products. And when he died, his family sold this painting. I asked the director of the MIA at the time about it, and she was saying that she was never told that it was going to be on for sale. And lo and behold, Wadsworth and Athenaeum Art Museum in Connecticut bought it, and we'll never see it again. Unless you're lucky enough to go to a Gentileschi exhibition, I guess. Now we're going to move to Judith Leister, the most famous, I think that we can say most famous artist of the Dutch 17th century, female artist of the Dutch 17th century. A lot of people love this painting. It's the National Gallery in DC. I've seen it many times. And I think part of the reason why people love it so much is because there's this, huge contrast between, doing this, doing a painting, which is messy, and then Judith has on all that lace, and it looks like she's wearing a very elegant, expensive dress. And that gets into that whole idea of why is it that female artists have to present themselves as elegant, and later on, as we'll see with Vigie Lebrun, a mother. Why can't they just be in a gross painting smock of some kind? And I think we're past that now, I would say. Finally, 20th and 21st century, maybe we're past it. But anyways, okay, so this is Judith Leister. And the great thing about her is, and she's very unique in this, is that she does genre scenes. So scenes from everyday life. Again, rare for women. Women were usually doing, as we've talked about before, still lifes and portraits. And she's so good at it that for quite a long time, a lot of her paintings were identified, misappropriated to her teacher, Frans Hals. And luckily now we're finding that there's a lot more Judith Leisters out there than we once believed. Okay, I don't think we've talked about this. I don't think is she in the 250? I can't remember, but this is Anna Maria Sibley Marianne. And she is, in essence, most known for her scientific illustrations. And she was a real outlier. She was not a conventional woman for her day. She and her daughter actually sailed to South America, and that's where she produced some of her most famous images of plants and such. And you can't go wrong with her. I mean, she's an absolutely just amazing artist. And if you're interested in science, you got to look her up. Okay, and then this is Rachel Rouge. She's the most famous Dutch 17th century female still life artist. That's a mouthful. Really, really quite exceptional in her abilities. And of course, a lot of people talk about the fact that some of these plants and flowers could not all bloom at the same time. So it's realistic painting, but in a way it's not. I would know nothing about this because I have no understanding of flowers and plants and such. Just not something I've ever really looked into. I should at some point in my life, maybe. And this is Angelica Kaufmann. She's on the 250. And she's Swiss, and she's mostly a portrait painter, and she's heavily influenced by neoclassicism, as you can see with the horizontal composition. And also the dresses are neoclassical as well. And now we go to Elizabeth Vigie Lebrun. I'm waiting for a movie to be made about her. I hope it comes out soon. She was the main court painter for Marie Antoinette, and that's who is on the right. That painting has an interesting story. So Marie Antoinette was the daughter of the Empress of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and therefore she was the enemy to the French. And they hoped that the marriage between Marie Antoinette and who was then the Dauphin at the time, who would later become Louis XVI, would somewhat bring peace between the two political entities, if you will. And she did not have children for quite some time. That wasn't her fault. And anyways, so believe it or not, it's pretty rare for an aristocrat in this time period to have a painting with their children, which I think seems quite odd to us today, but it's true. But she bucked that sort of trend, or asked Vigie Lebrun to buck that trend with this painting on the right. And then Elizabeth Vigie Lebrun is, yes, a great painter, but also a mother in the one on the left. And then I think we've talked about this before. The one on the painting on the left of Marie Antoinette was really controversial because she was wearing sort of a underdress and not exhibiting great French Parisian fashion like she was supposed to do, I guess, every day. So they took that painting down and put up the one on the right, which is the proper painting, which seems really weird to our 21st century eyes. She is showing the latest styles. And it's in this time period, the Rococo time period, in which styles change and are noted, and the styles change because of the seasons, which I guess if you're aware of the fashion world, which I'm not necessarily, that happens now it's been in the fashion world for, I guess, well, you would say centuries since Marie Antoinette's time, and a little bit before that, actually. And then finally, on the left is our very own Vigie Lebrun that the Minneapolis Institute of Arts owns. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm always amazed that we have one in our Twin Cities. Although I would say, and I've been to a lot of museums in the United States, I would say mostly because she was so prolific, most museums have at least one Vigie Lebrun painting. And then on the right is a self-portrait done in Russia. I think I told you guys this story before, but the best art collection in Russia before the revolution in 1917 was owned by what was called the Stroganoff family. And yes, they are the ones, I guess, that came up with the beef stroganoff recipe. But anyways, I was in Portland, Oregon in the late 90s or early aughts and saw the Stroganoff collection reconstituted in the museum. And this was the painting that was in it. And it's a self-portrait. Again, we've talked about that. Self-portraits are very popular. Okay, here is Anne Vallier-Castier's still life. And she is of the same time period as Vigie Lebrun. So, yeah, and one of the ways that she makes things really pop in her, so to speak, I mean, that's not a great term, pop, she starts with a red ground instead of a white ground. And they're quite beautiful. And she and Elizabeth Vigie Lebrun were accepted into the Royal Academy, which was really rare for that time period. And then on the left is another female painter, Adelaide Labille Girard's self-portrait with two pupils. Who are those guys? And she's also dressed to the nines, much like Judith Leister. It's a really striking portrait. It's at the Met. A lot of people are very familiar with it. And then on the right, a lesser known painting, another female artist, Marie Lemon, Interior of Woman Painter's Atelier. And she's probably instructing the young woman down below on how to paint. Okay, so we're seeing a little bit of a shakeup of the male-dominated world here in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Okay, we've talked about her before, Rosa Bonheur, and she was educated at the Académie Julian. So some of these art academies, especially in France, were opening up to women. This is one of her more famous paintings. She is basically known as the painter of animals, for sure. And then this is her horse fair. She, this traveled, we've talked about this story before, but it's always one of my favorite stories. So this travels in the United States, and there is a Wyoming rancher who loves this painting so much that he wants to give a horse, a prize stallion, to Bonheur, and he puts an ad in the paper. Anna Klumpke, an artist in San Francisco, answers it. And is the she can speak French, that's what he's looking for, and goes over with him. She falls in love with Rosa Bonheur, and she does a portrait of her here. You'll learn about the fact that they are buried together, but there's a little bit more to that actual story for your possible EMAC coming to a computer near you. And then this is Mary Cassatt. We've talked about her in class as well. She's in the 250. I love this self-portrait on the left. It looks as though it's not finished, but I think she just left it as it was, which I think it makes it more interesting. And much like going back to Zoffanitsa Anguissola, she largely paints her family. And this is kind of unusual on the right because it's usually a mother and daughter, but in this case, it's her brother and her nephew. She was a very rich woman from Pittsburgh and spent most of her life in Paris. And let's look at some more. I just love this one. This is at the National Gallery in DC. I've seen it many times. And it's really interesting. So they've discovered when they did a new exhibition a couple of years ago on Cassatt and Degas, that Degas actually painted some part of this work. And so that brings up all kinds of, interesting questions. Well, my big question has always been, Degas was known as a person that really didn't like women. And so how did he have this incredible friendship with Mary Cassatt? I mean, how did that all happen? But anyways, Cassatt, I think even now we tend to have a little bit even more of an appreciation of her. And then last but not least, we looked at a print on the 250. Remember that she is becoming influenced by Japanese woodblock prints and becomes really an innovator in her own right with regards to printmaking processes. And there's just a lot of interesting prints out there in museum collections. And here you have, on the right at least, something you would probably expect, a mother and child and nanny, I would say. And then on the left, it seems more on the left is emphasized or influenced by Japanese woodblock prints. Okay, so the most famous female French Impressionist artist is Berthe Morisot. And in general, I don't think necessarily she's painting in a way that would define her as a female painter. But nonetheless, she has these beautiful paintings. There was just a new retrospective in the United States on her about a year ago. I would need to get the catalog. So this is a really nice one. And then this one is my favorite one. And is oftentimes, if you're thinking about her, you'll see this particular painting. And remember, the Impressionists were about getting out in nature with their small easels and their tubes of paint, and painting what was in front of them, art for art's sake, which I think this one really is a great example of. All right, then this woman is just, somebody's got to make a movie about this woman. I think for me, she's in the top 3. I know that's a bold statement, of most interesting artists, male or female. And that, of course, is Edmonia Lewis. On the left is a photograph of her. And she was biracial. She was part Native American. And she sculpted in white marble. Now, she's not unusual in the fact that there were a few women in Italy that sculpted in marble. But of course, she is different in that she was biracial. I think I've mentioned before that they hadn't found her grave, and just 3 years ago, they found it in the London area. And it's interesting. There was an art historian who was talking about the fact that her females don't look Native American, however you want to, sort of talk about that, quote unquote. But her men tend to, and this particular art historian was saying maybe she didn't want her art to be always seen as autobiographical. I don't know myself. And then on the left is Hagar. Remember that Edmonia Lewis was at Oberlin College, and and there was this rumor going around the campus that she was a witch, and she left, and so she would probably have some connection to Hagar, who is thrown out into the desert with Ishmael once, I was going to get this right, once Abraham's wife Sarah has Isaac, and so the Egyptian slave Hagar is kind of cast out, like she felt cast out from Oberlin. And then on the right side is a sculpture I always love to go see in DC. It's at the Smithsonian's Museum of American Art. It is a very large sculpture of Cleopatra, and this one has a very interesting story. At one point, it was a grave marker over a horse named Cleopatra outside of Chicago. But thank God it was saved, and we have it now at a great museum. Okay, this is kind of fun. So this is, I think I'm skipping Camille Claudot. I don't know why. Maybe I'll come back to her. Okay, so this is Paula Meerszen Becker's self-portrait on the left. And we think this is the first time, this is 1906, this is the first time a woman artist has painted herself nude. So that's kind of an interesting claim to fame. And then on the right is Tamara Lempicka, and she has become hugely known and loved, and particularly on the art market. Recently, there was a huge break of a record for how much her art went for. And this is a 1929 image, the time of Art Nouveau and Art Deco. And we're seeing that here. It's a self-portrait in a car. A lot of people love her. And then, okay, so, sorry, I skipped that. So here's Camille Claudot. Boy, how many movies have been made about her? So she was an apprentice under Rodin, and then I believe they had a romantic relationship, and is seen as one of the best sculptures, probably, of the late 19th and early 20th century. I really like that piece on the right. And then we're kind of going through some fun ones here. So this is Sonia Delaney. And it's two models wearing fur coats designed by the artist with a car. And she was involved in the Bauhaus. And then she also had some time, I believe, at Black Mountain College. And somebody that I think a lot more people are interested in for sure. And then, where are we at? Delaney. Oh, okay. So this is Romaine Brooke, and she was a lesbian, and also a, I don't know if we would call her, I guess we'd call her a dandy, wouldn't we? Maybe it's going back to our term, drag, mister? Was that the term we learned recently? Drag king, not drag mister. Oh, lordy. Okay, so anyways, self-portrait on the left. And then a woman, Lady Trubridge, on the right. I've always been fascinated by this artist. I need to learn more about her. And then, not too surprisingly, we're now to the German expressionist / more Dadaist, Hannah Hoke. This is one of her most famous works. And remember, along with John Hartfield, she was a real innovator with regards to photomontage. That goes out to all of my media students. And then this is, of course, Käthe Kollwitz's, one of her prints. She was definitely a German expressionist, and oftentimes dealt with death in her life, and therefore it was in her works. And this is The Weaver's Revolt. And then this is Death Seizes a Woman. All right, we're almost done, guys. What are we at? Like almost 29 minutes? We're doing fine. Okay, so the answer to the question of the day is that Brynn had a stork bite when she was born on her left eyelid. It is no longer there, but that is where her stork bite was. Stork bite, not stork bike, on her left eyelid. Okay, now surrealism. Let's look at some of our faves. Okay, so Leonora Carrington. This is a self-portrait. She famously was working in Europe. She was the second wife of Max Ernst. They split up. She ended in Mexico. She ended up in Mexico City. And there's just a lot of talk and academic research these days with regards to Leonora Carrington. I never really looked to her works that much, but lately I've become very much more interested. And then this is my favorite female surrealist. This is Dorothea Tanning from Ohio. And remember that Max Ernst comes into her apartment and looks at this self-portrait with, I don't know, skunk bird, and says, Leonora, let's get married. You no longer have to be a fashion illustrator. We'll be fine artists the rest of our lives. And they were. And Leonora Carrington later in life becomes a poet, sells this painting. You guys have heard this story before, but I love talking about it, to the Philadelphia Museum of Art for quite a bit of money, and then gives the money to an obscure poetry journal, which I think is awesome. And then here's another one of hers. This is Dorothea Tanning again. You'll notice that one of her motifs, she usually has, well, not usually, but sometimes has doors, which is interesting to kind of think about. And then this is Kay Sage. You guys are going to learn a little bit more about her, hopefully, on the EMAC. She was married to Yves Tanguy, the famous biomorphic surrealist. And I think she's kind of having a little bit of a resurgence in interest in her, I'd say, over the last 5 years. And then this artist, I did not know at all anything about her. I want to know more. There was maybe 3 years ago a major exhibition on André Scherer. I hope I'm not mispronouncing. This is called Nursery Rhyme. And out on the East Coast, there was an exhibition on her, again, just a few years ago. And then last but not least, Dada/Surrealism, ready-made, Mert Oppenheim, fur-lined teacup. It's part of the 250. And that does it. What do we do? 32 minutes? We got it. Okay. So this is the first part of Female Artist. We will have another one in a couple days.